Grandma Genevieve was like the earth itself, solid, deep, and possessing a wealth that wasn't just in her bank accounts, but in her silence. She watched everything, her gaze missing no detail, no flicker of resentment in my eyes, or flash of smug satisfaction on Serafina's face. She passed away last week, a quiet end to a formidable life, and tomorrow is her funeral. I know exactly how it will play out. Serafina, draped in obscenely expensive black silk, will stand at the lectern in the old stone church and deliver a eulogy that is a masterclass in performative grief. She will speak of Grandma Genevieve's strength and wisdom, all while subtly positioning herself as the natural inheritor of that legacy. She is utterly unshakably secure in the knowledge that she is the primary heir to our grandmother's considerable estate. She sees it as her birthright, the final, golden confirmation of her superior life choices. The rest of the family sees it that way, too. They've all been orbiting Serafina and her wealth for years, and this inheritance is simply the sun finally collapsing into its brightest star. But they have no idea. Serafina, in her gilded cage, has been blissfully ignorant. She has no idea that for the last 10 years, every Tuesday afternoon, my beat-up sedan would pull into the long gravel driveway of Grandma Genevieve's secluded country house. She has no idea that while she was hosting brunches and planning charity galas, I was sitting at a heavy oak desk with our grandmother, learning, not about baking or knitting, but about amortized loans and dividend reinvestment plans, about the intricate architecture of trusts and the brutal, beautiful logic of the stock market. For a decade, my quiet, shrewd grandmother was secretly mentoring me, forging my mind into a tool as sharp and uncompromising as her own. She has made me the sole executor and sole beneficiary of her will. The will reading, at my specific instruction to the estate lawyer, Mr. Peterson, is scheduled to take place immediately after the funeral service, in the cold, formal drawing room of our grandmother's house. Everyone will be there. Serafina's world, a shimmering bubble of entitlement and condescension, is about to be turned completely, irrevocably upside down, and I will be the one holding the pin. The morning of the funeral began with an act of predictable, suffocating charity. A courier delivered a large, flat box from a high-end designer boutique. Inside, nestled in tissue paper that probably cost more than my weekly groceries, was a black dress. It was beautiful, of course, elegant, understated, and astronomically expensive. A note was tucked into the sleeve, written in Serafina's looping, self-conscious script. Thought you might need something appropriate, darling. Don't worry about it. My treat. My treat. The two words that had defined our relationship for 15 years. I held the silk. It felt cold and heavy, like a shroud of obligation. I folded it carefully, placed it back in the box, and slid it under my bed. I then walked to my own closet and pulled out the simple, well-made black dress I'd bought myself 2 years ago for a friend's wedding. It fit perfectly. It was mine. The true inciting incident, the moment the ground shifted beneath my feet, hadn't been Grandma's death. It had happened 3 days before she passed. She was in the hospital, comfortable but fading, and our family had been taking shifts sitting with her. I had just finished my 8-hour vigil, my mind a numb haze of grief and antiseptic smells, when Serafina caught me in the hallway. She steered me to the bleak little waiting area, her hand on my arm, a gesture not of comfort, but of ownership. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Elara, we need to be practical about what's coming," she began, her voice low and conspiratorial, as if she were letting me in on a vital secret. "Once Grandma is gone, things will be complicated. Marcus and I have been talking. The estate is significant, and managing it will be a full-time job." I just stared at her, too tired to even process the monstrous callousness of it all. We were 100 feet from our dying grandmother, and she was talking about management structures. "I'll be taking the lead, of course," she continued, oblivious. "Marcus's financial advisors are the best in the country, but I want you to know that you won't be forgotten." She gave my arm a squeeze that was meant to be reassuring. "We've worked out a number, a small allowance, paid monthly, enough to supplement your salary. It will take the pressure off you. You can focus on your students, without worrying about things like your car breaking down again. She smiled, a tight, serene expression of magnanimity. She was offering me scraps, from a feast she hadn't even inherited yet, and she expected me to be grateful. Something inside me, a tightly wound coil of resentment I'd been suppressing for my entire adult life, didn't just snap, it vaporized. All the years of her casual insults disguised as concern, her pity masquerading as generosity, all of it coalesced into that one horrifying moment. She didn't see me as her sister. She saw me as a line item in her future budget, a problem to be managed, a pet project. I didn't say anything. I just pulled my arm away, turned, and walked out of the hospital. I didn't trust myself to speak. The rage was a physical thing, hot and choking in my throat. I drove home in a blur, the city lights smearing into meaningless streaks of color. I stumbled into my small, quiet apartment, the one Serafina always called cozy, with a slight pitying wrinkle of her nose, and I finally let it out. I didn't scream or throw things. I just sat on my sofa in the dark and cried. It was a deep, shuddering, hopeless kind of crying, the kind that comes when you realize a fundamental truth you've spent years trying to ignore. My own sister, the person who was supposed to be my closest ally in the world, held me in complete and utter contempt. The first person I called was Liam. He's my best friend, another teacher at my school, and the only person on the planet who understood the quiet passion that drove me to my profession. He picked up on the second ring, his voice instantly alert. "Elara, what's wrong?" I told him everything. The conversation with Serafina, the allowance, the cold, transactional way she was already carving up our grandmother's life. He listened without interrupting, a talent that was rarer and more valuable than any of Marcus's stock options. When I finally ran out of words, choking on a final, bitter sob, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Her problem, Elara, is that she can't assign a dollar value to what you do, so she assumes it has no value. It's the sickness of people like her. They can only see the price of things, never their worth." His words were like a balm on a raw wound. He then told me his own parents had called that evening, their weekly guilt trip disguised as a check-in. They'd sent him yet another link to a law school application, with a note saying it wasn't too late to make something of himself. It was a different flavor of the same poison, the belief that a life dedicated to service was a life wasted. Hearing his story, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. It was the grim comfort of shared experience, the realization that I wasn't entirely alone in this fight. We were both pushing back against a world that saw our calling as a cute, unprofitable hobby. That conversation with Liam was a lifeline. It didn't solve anything, but it anchored me. It reminded me that my world, the world of lesson plans and scraped knees, and the slow, beautiful dawn of a child's understanding, was just as real and valid as Serafina's world of stock portfolios and summer homes in the Hamptons. We talked for over an hour, our conversation a quiet rebellion against the families that sought to define us by their own narrow metrics of success. The call that Grandma Genevieve had passed came 2 days later. The news hit me with the force of a physical blow, a deep, hollow ache that spread through my chest. But underneath the crushing wave of grief, something else was taking root. A cold, hard resolve. I thought back to my last lucid conversation with her, a month before she fell ill. I'd been over for our weekly lesson, and we were reviewing the final details of her estate trust. She'd looked at me over the top of her reading glasses, her eyes as sharp and clear as ever. "The numbers are just tools, Elara," she had said, her voice the familiar, dry rasp that I would miss so terribly. "They are levers, powerful, yes, but useless without a firm hand to guide them. The real asset is your character, the empathy you have, the patience." Serafina sees those things as weaknesses. She is wrong. She had reached across the desk and patted my hand. "Don't ever let them mistake your kindness for weakness. The time for being quiet is almost over." At the time I thought she was just giving me a life lesson. Now I understood. It was a mission statement. It was my inheritance, more valuable than any stock certificate. My grief for her was immense, a vast, empty space in my life. But my resolve was growing to fill it. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself. It was about honoring my grandmother's faith in me. It was about proving she was right. But as I thought of Serafina's smug, pitying face in that hospital hallway, a colder, harder thought echoed in the back of my mind. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. Until my sister made it so blindingly clear that in her eyes, I was worthless. And I decided, in that moment, that I was going to show her, and everyone else, exactly what my grandmother had thought I was worth. The history of my subjugation was long and meticulously documented in the family photo albums, and in the deeper, unhealed annals of my memory. It began in childhood, as these things so often do. I remember one Christmas, with searing clarity. I was 8, and Serafina was 10. Under the tree were 2 large, brightly wrapped boxes. Serafina tore hers open to reveal the Starlight ballerina doll, a magnificent creation with a silk tutu and real satin slippers, the most coveted toy of the year. My box contained a handsome, leather-bound encyclopedia set. My parents beamed. For our little scholar, my father had said, ruffling my hair. Serafina was praised for her grace and beauty as she made the doll twirl. I was praised for being sensible. Even then, I understood the distinction. She was celebrated for what she was. I was commended for what I could do. One was a state of being, the other a state of utility. This dynamic hardened as we grew older. In high school, Serafina was the prom queen, the head of the social committee, her life a whirlwind of popularity and effortless charm. I was the editor of the school paper, the debate club captain, my life a quieter affair of deadlines and research. Our parents framed it as a charming dichotomy. Our social butterfly and our little intellectual, my mother would say to friends, as if we were 2 complementary sides of a coin. But it never felt equal. Her world was presented as the ideal, mine as a quirky but less desirable alternative. The true schism occurred when we chose our careers. Serafina, armed with a business degree from a prestigious university our parents had paid for, went to work at a high-powered marketing firm. Her ambition was lauded at every family gathering. Her long hours and corporate speak were seen as evidence of her drive and seriousness. A year later, when I announced I was going into teaching, having worked my way through a state college with a combination of scholarships and part-time jobs, the reaction was muted. "Oh, how sweet," my mother said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You always were so good with children." They saw it not as a career, but as a form of community service, a noble but ultimately unprofitable hobby. They paid for Serafina's ambition, but they expected my passion to be its own reward. Serafina's wedding to Marcus was the grand coronation she had been planning her entire life. It was a lavish, ostentatious affair at a country club that smelled of old money and new hypocrisy. I was a bridesmaid, stuffed into a dress that cost more than my first month's rent, feeling less like a sister and more like a prop. During the reception, Marcus's father, a bombastic man with a red face and a booming laugh, stood to give a toast. He praised Serafina's beauty and poise, and then he turned his attention to me. And to Elara, he bellowed, raising his glass. Proof that not everyone in the family is afraid of a little hard work for a good cause. The room chuckled politely. Serafina smiled, a serene, queenly smile, as if her greatness was so immense, it could even cast a little reflected glow on poor, humble me. It was a public branding. I was Elara, the good-hearted, perpetually broke teacher, the official family charity case. The turning point, the beginning of my secret life, came 2 weeks after that wedding. I was feeling lower than I ever had. The humiliation of that toast still stinging like a fresh wound. On a whim, I drove out to see Grandma Genevieve. I found her in her garden, methodically pruning her rose bushes. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just handed me a pair of gloves and shears, and we worked in silence for an hour. The rhythmic snip of the blades, the only sound between us. When we were done, we sat on the porch with glasses of iced tea. She let the silence stretch, watching me with those knowing eyes. Finally, she spoke. "Serafina has chosen her path," she said. Her voice neutral. "She believes a woman's power is in who she marries, My mother believed that. I do not. She took a slow sip of her tea. Her person's true power, Elara, is in what they control, in what they understand. It is in their independence. She set her glass down with a decisive click. Come over next Tuesday afternoon. Around 3. There's something I want to show you. I had no idea what to expect. I thought maybe she was going to teach me how to invest the meager savings I had. I arrived that Tuesday to find her not in the living room, but in her study, a room I'd rarely entered. It was a space of quiet, masculine energy. Dark wood, leather chairs, and shelves lined not with novels, but with volumes on economics, finance, and law. On the great oak desk in the center of the room, she had laid out a simple ledger book. This, she said, tapping the cover, is the budget for this household. Your first lesson is understanding where the money goes. We will not move on until you can explain every single line item back to me. And so it began. For 10 years, my secret education continued. Serafina would call me on Tuesday afternoons, and I'd let it go to voicemail. Just at the market, darling. Call you back. I'd text, while in reality, I was tracing the cryptic dance of the S&P 500 on a stock ticker, or learning the crucial difference between a revocable and an irrevocable trust. The lessons were rigorous. Grandma Genevieve was a patient but demanding teacher. We started with the basics of her own finances. Budgeting, then personal accounting. She made me balance her books every month. Then came investing. She opened a small brokerage account with $50,000 of her own money and gave me control. This is your tuition, she said. Learn with it. If you lose it, the lesson will be twice as valuable. I made mistakes. I panicked during a market dip and sold low. She didn't scold me. She simply made me perform a detailed analysis of my emotional decision-making versus the market fundamentals. Never let fear make your decisions, Elara. Fear is a terrible financial advisor. I learned I made the money back, and then I made it grow. From there, we moved to the complex machinery of her wealth. Real estate holdings, tax law, the intricate web of shell corporations and trusts that protected her assets. She walked me through every document, explaining the legal jargon, the strategic purpose of every clause. She showed me her will. Even then, 5 years ago, my name was there, as the sole beneficiary and executor. When I looked at her, stunned into silence, she just gave a curt nod. An executor must be someone of unimpeachable character, who understands the estate intimately, and who will not be swayed by sentiment or greed. In this family, Elara, you are the only candidate. Our final lesson was just a year ago. She presented me with a hypothetical scenario. A mid-sized family-owned manufacturing company on the brink of bankruptcy. The family was infighting, the books were a mess, and the creditors were circling. She gave me a week. I dove into it, spending every evening creating spreadsheets, researching turnaround strategies, and drafting a plan. But my solution wasn't just about numbers. I proposed a new management structure that gave the warring family members clearly defined roles to stop the infighting. A debt restructuring plan that was tough but fair to the creditors, and an employee profit-sharing program to boost morale and productivity. I presented my plan to her in the study. She listened without a word, her face unreadable. When I finished, she was silent for a full minute. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. Then, a slow smile spread across her face, a rare and brilliant thing. Excellent, she said, her voice filled with a quiet pride that was worth more to me than all the gold in Fort Knox. You didn't just save the company, Elara. You saved the family. You saw the people behind the numbers. You're ready. After she passed, the first official step was to meet with Mr. Peterson, her longtime lawyer. I walked into his stately, wood-paneled office, feeling the full weight of the last 10 years on my shoulders. He was a kind, elderly man, with a gentle demeanor that belied a razor-sharp mind. He had been aware of my apprenticeship, as he called it, from the very beginning. Genevieve was very proud of you, Elara, he said as I sat down. She told me many times that you had a finer mind for this than anyone in the family, including her own husband, when he was alive. He opened a thick leather-bound folder. Everything is in order, just as she designed it. You are the sole executor of the will and the sole beneficiary of the Genevieve Hale Trust, which encompasses the entirety of the estate. The will is ironclad. She had it reviewed by 3 separate legal firms and underwent a full psychiatric evaluation at the time of its final signing 2 years ago. She anticipated a challenge. He anticipated a challenge. Of course she did. She knew her family. She knew Serafina. Mr. Peterson then slid a thinner file across the desk towards me. She also left this. It's a file containing a series of promissory notes, all legally drafted and signed by your sister and her husband over the last 8 years. They total a significant sum. They are debts owed to the estate. Genevieve's instructions were that the executor should handle these at their own discretion. I stared at the file. The hidden leverage. It wasn't just a shield, it was a sword. My grandmother hadn't just given me a fortune. She had given me justice, packaged and notarized. As I left his office, the heavy burden I'd been carrying felt different. It was no longer the weight of grief and responsibility alone. It now felt like armor. The funeral was in 2 days. The quiet time was officially over. The day of the funeral dawned gray and overcast, a perfect mirror for the mood in my soul. I drove to the old church, the one our family had attended for generations, and parked my modest car at the far end of the lot, away from the gleaming German sedans and luxury SUVs that belonged to Serafina's world. The air was thick with the scent of lilies, an oppressive, cloying sweetness that seemed to emanate from the mountain of flowers choking the altar, a display I knew Serafina had ordered and would later use as a tax write-off for her husband's company. I saw her near the entrance, a tragic queen holding court. She was swathed in a black dress that looked like spun shadow, a delicate veil failing to conceal her artfully tear-streaked face. She was embracing a distant cousin, her shoulders heaving with what, to the untrained eye, looked like unbearable sorrow. I knew it for what it was, a performance. She was playing the role of the devoted, grieving granddaughter, and she was doing it brilliantly. When she saw me, her face shifted. The grief softened into a mask of gentle pity. "Elara, darling," she whispered, pulling me into a hug that felt like being wrapped in a cold, perfumed snake. "I'm so glad you're here. This must be so hard for you." The implication was clear. It was harder for me, the poor one, the one who didn't have a 9-figure net worth to fall back on. I simply nodded and extricated myself from her grasp. "It's hard for everyone, Serafina." I found a seat in a pew near the back, a silent observer to my own family's drama. Liam had offered to come, but I told him no. This was something I had to do alone. He sent a text that morning. "Remember who you are. Remember what she saw in you. They can't touch that." I held on to those words like a talisman. The service was a blur of platitudes and somber organ music. Then Serafina ascended to the lectern to deliver the eulogy. She clutched a piece of paper, but never looked at it. This speech had been rehearsed. She spoke of Grandma Genevieve's fierce spirit and unconditional love. She told a sanitized anecdote about a time Grandma had consoled her after she'd lost a school election, painting Genevieve as a doting, sentimental figure who existed primarily to soothe Serafina's ego. "She was my rock," Serafina said, her voice cracking perfectly. "My confidant. In her final years, we grew so close. I would visit her, and we would talk for hours about her legacy, about her hopes for the future of this family." I felt a cold, sharp anger cut through my grief. A lie. A bald-faced, monstrous lie. Serafina had visited our grandmother, maybe twice a year, for a perfunctory holiday meal. Their conversations were stilted, surface-level affairs. The confidant, the student of her legacy, was me. I was the one who had sat with her for hundreds of hours, absorbing her wisdom, her stories, her very essence. And here was my sister, erasing me from the narrative, painting over my reality, with her own self-aggrandizing fiction. I sat perfectly still, my hands clasped in my lap, my face a carefully constructed mask of neutral sorrow. I let her have her moment. I knew it would be her last. As the service concluded, and people began to shuffle out, murmuring condolences, the silent takeover began. This was the first move, one I had arranged with Mr. Peterson a few days prior. As Serafina, Marcus, and my parents were beginning to direct the flow of guests toward the reception at the grand family home, Mr. Peterson stepped forward. He cleared his throat, a quiet sound that somehow cut through the hushed chaos of the room. "If I may have a moment of your attention," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "I have an announcement on behalf of the late Genevieve Hale." The room fell silent. Serafina looked over, a flicker of annoyance on her face at having her authority undermined. "It was Genevieve's explicit and final instruction," Mr. Peterson continued, "that the reading of her last will and testament was to take place immediately following this service. She requested it be done in the presence of the immediate family, here, before any other gatherings." A wave of confusion rippled through the assembled room. This was highly unorthodox. Will readings were typically private affairs, held in a lawyer's office weeks later. Serafina's face tightened. This was not part of her script. It ruined the flow of her perfectly curated day of mourning. "Mr. Peterson, surely that can wait," she said, her voice dripping with forced politeness. "We have guests. People are waiting at the house." "My apologies, Serafina," the lawyer said, his tone unyielding. "My instructions from the testator were absolute. The reading is to be now." He gestured toward the small formal meeting room, off the church's main vestibule. "If the family would please join me." Serafina was furious. I could see it in the tense line of her jaw. But she couldn't object, without looking crass and money-grubbing, on the day of her grandmother's funeral. She shot me a look, as if this was somehow my fault, a foolish whim of the sensible sister. Marcus looked smug, whispering something in her ear, probably about how it was just a formality, and they'd be done with it soon. My parents, ever the conflict-averse peacemakers, just looked flustered. We filed into the small cold room. It felt like a tribunal. My parents, my aunt and uncle, Serafina, Marcus and me. We sat in stiff-backed chairs, arranged in a semicircle, around a small table, where Mr. Peterson placed his leather briefcase. The air was thick with anticipation. Serafina had regained her composure, and was now wearing an expression of solemn importance, as if she were about to be crowned. Mr. Peterson put on his glasses, and opened the will. "I will now read the last will and testament of Genevieve Hale," he began formally. He started with the minor bequests: a piece of jewelry to a cousin, a donation to the local library, a small sum to her longtime gardener. With each minor item, I could feel Serafina's confidence growing. This was just housekeeping before the main event. Then Mr. Peterson paused. He looked up over his spectacles, his eyes briefly meeting mine. This was it. "As to the remainder of my estate," he read, his voice clear and steady, "including all real and personal property, all stocks, bonds, securities, and financial accounts, held both domestically and internationally, and the contents of all my homes and safety deposit boxes, I give, devise, and bequeath the entirety of it, without exception, to my beloved granddaughter, Elara Vance." Silence. It was not a loud silence. It was a profound, vacuum-sealed silence. A void where all the air, all the sound, all the certainty in the room had just ceased to exist. I watched Serafina's face. It was a slow-motion collapse. The serene, confident smile didn't just disappear. It seemed to curdle. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, darted from the lawyer to me. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Marcus, beside her, looked as if he'd been physically struck. His smug expression had vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed, fish-like gape. Mr. Peterson wasn't finished. He let the silence hang for a beat longer, then continued. "Furthermore, I hereby appoint my granddaughter, Elara Vance, as the sole executor of this, my last will and testament, and as the successor trustee of the Genevieve Hale Revocable Trust, granting her full and absolute authority over all assets contained therein." That was the moment. The silence. No, the word was a strangled whisper, from Serafina. Then louder, "No, that's not right. That's a mistake." She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "Read it again. There must be a typo." My father found his voice. "First, Mr. Peterson, are you certain? There must be a misunderstanding. Genevieve always intended for Serafina too. The document is perfectly clear, Robert," Mr. Peterson said, his voice cutting through the rising panic. "It is legally sound and properly executed. There is no misunderstanding." Serafina's face, which had been pale with shock, was now flooding with a dark, mottled red. Her disbelief was rapidly calcifying into pure, unadulterated rage. She turned on me, her eyes blazing with a fury I had never seen before. "You," she hissed, the word full of venom. "What did you do? What did you do to her?" The accusation hung in the air, ugly and poisonous. She wasn't just losing an inheritance. She was losing her status, her narrative, her entire identity as the chosen one. And in the wreckage of her world, she could only see one culprit: me. The quiet, sensible charity case, who had apparently just pulled off the heist of the century. The performance was over. The real Serafina was finally on stage. The ensuing scene was an explosion of raw, unfiltered entitlement. Serafina's carefully constructed facade of the grieving, benevolent matriarch crumbled into dust, revealing the grasping, furious child beneath. "You manipulated her," she shrieked, her voice echoing in the small, stone-walled room. "A senile old woman. You took advantage of her. I'll have you charged. I'll have this thrown out. This is a fraud." Marcus, having recovered from his initial shock, was now on his feet beside her, his face a mask of outrage. "She's right. This is insane. Everyone knew Genevieve's intentions. We'll contest this. We'll see you in court, Peterson. And you," he said, turning to me with a sneer, "you'll be lucky to get bus fare home when we're done with you." My parents were in a state of flustered panic, trying to play peacemaker, while clearly being on Serafina's side. Now, let's all just calm down," my mother said, wringing her hands. "Elara dear, this is obviously a terrible shock. Your sister is just upset. Perhaps you can explain how this came to be." She was asking me to manage Serafina's emotions, to soothe the very person who was accusing me of being a manipulative elder abuser. The habit of casting me as the family's emotional shock absorber was so ingrained she didn't even realize what she was doing. Throughout all of this, I remained silent. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue. I just sat there, my hands still clasped in my lap, and I watched. My silence was a vacuum, and their rage rushed in to fill it. It was more powerful than any denial I could have offered. My calmness was, to them, an indictment. It was the serene confidence of someone who knew they held all the cards. My aunt and uncle, who had initially looked as shocked as everyone else, now seemed to be shrinking into their chairs, their eyes darting between Serafina's apoplectic fit and my unnerving stillness. They were calculating, realizing the balance of power in the family had just undergone a seismic shift, and they didn't want to be on the losing side. Seeing that her rage and threats were having no effect on me, or the implacable Mr. Peterson, Serafina abruptly shifted tactics. The fury vanished, replaced by a torrent of crocodile tears. Her shoulders slumped, and she buried her face in her hands, her sobs loud and theatrical. "How could you do this to me, Elara?" she wailed, peering at me through her fingers. "To our family, after everything I've done for you, all the times I've helped you?" She was turning now to the court of family opinion, trying to reclaim the moral high ground, to paint me as the ungrateful viper. "Who do you think paid for your flight to California when you couldn't afford to go to Cousin Jenna's wedding? Me. That lovely dress you wore to the charity gala last year. I bought that for you. I have tried, my whole life. I have tried to lift you up, to include you, to make sure you never felt left out because of your circumstances." She was weaponizing her condescension, twisting every past act of pity into a profound sacrifice she had made on my behalf. She was trying to reframe my inheritance, not as my grandmother's wish, but as a theft from her, the long-suffering benefactor. The other relatives in the room, the ones who had been quietly trying to edge toward the door, paused. They looked at me, their expressions a mixture of confusion and dawning suspicion. Perhaps Serafina had a point. Perhaps I was the villain here. Her performance was masterful, but it was based on a faulty premise. She assumed I was still the same person I had been a week ago. She was wrong. It was time to speak. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the silence settle again after her dramatic outburst. When I spoke, my voice was low, steady, and devoid of the emotion she was so desperately trying to provoke. It was the voice Grandma Genevieve had taught me to use when negotiating, calm, factual, and final. "Helped me, Serafina," I asked, my gaze level with hers. "Are you talking about the plane ticket you bought after loudly announcing to the entire family that you were rescuing me from missing the wedding? Or are you referring to the dress for the gala?" I paused, letting the memory hang in the air. "The one you sent to my apartment, with the $300 price tag, conspicuously left on the sleeve, so I would understand the precise magnitude of your generosity." A flicker of shock registered in her eyes. I had never spoken to her like this. I had never called out the subtext of her actions. "For 15 years, I continued, my voice gaining a hard, clear edge, "you have used your husband's money as a weapon to feel superior. You didn't lift me up. You pushed me down, very gently and very politely, so you could stand on my back and feel taller. You didn't treat me like a sister. You treated me like a project, your favorite charity." I then turned my attention away from her, dismissing her, and looked directly at Mr. Peterson. "Mr. Peterson," I said, my tone shifting to one of business. "As the executor of the estate, I have the authority to review all of my grandmother's financial documents, correct?" "That is correct, Elara," he affirmed, his expression neutral, but his eyes holding a glimmer of something that looked like approval. "All files and records are now under your sole authority." "Excellent," I said. "Then I'd like to begin by reviewing the file you mentioned earlier, the one labeled promissory notes." If my words had been a slap to Serafina's face, this was a punch to the gut. The color drained from her cheeks. Beside her, Marcus went rigid, his face turning a pasty, sickly white. They both knew exactly what was in that file. I turned my gaze back to my stunned family. "You see," I explained, in that same calm, informative tone, "my sister is right about one thing. Grandma Genevieve was a very generous woman. Over the past 8 years, she generously extended a series of loans to Serafina and Marcus to help fund several of their less successful business ventures." I let that sink in. "Unlike Serafina's gifts to me," I went on, "Grandma's generosity was meticulously documented. She was a shrewd woman. Every dollar was recorded on a legally binding promissory note, signed by both my sister and her husband. The total amount of these outstanding loans, now payable to the estate, is," I glanced at Mr. Peterson, who gave a slight nod, "just over $2.3 million. As executor, I suppose my first official duty will be to ensure the prompt repayment of all debts owed to the estate. I'll have a formal collection notice sent to your lawyers in the morning." The knockout blow. The room was utterly still. It wasn't just that Serafina wasn't getting anything. It was that she was now massively in debt to me. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted. It had been inverted with the force of a tectonic plate. The patron was now the debtor. The charity case was now the creditor. Marcus looked like he was going to be physically ill. He grabbed Serafina's arm, no longer the supportive husband, but a panicked business partner, trying to staunch a fatal wound. "Serafina, we're leaving," he hissed, trying to pull her toward the door. My parents were utterly speechless, their faces a comical tableau of shock and confusion. They looked at me as if I were a stranger, a creature they had never met before. The carefully ordered universe they inhabited, with rich Serafina at its center, and poor Elara at its periphery, had just been obliterated. Serafina, however, had one last burst of fury left in her. She ripped her arm from Marcus's grasp. "You won't get away with this," she seethed, her voice a low, trembling whisper of pure hatred. "I'll fight you. I will contest this will. I will drag your name through the mud. I will see you in court for the rest of your life." I looked at her, at this raging, cornered woman, who was my sister, and I felt nothing but a vast, cold pity. The fight was already over, and she didn't even know it. "Go ahead, Serafina," I said, my voice soft, contested. Grandma and Mr. Peterson made sure the will was ironclad. "You'll spend a fortune on lawyers who will tell you exactly that." I leaned forward slightly, delivering the final quiet blow. "And please remember, as the estate will be defending the will's validity, it will be paying for my lawyers. You, on the other hand, will have to pay for your own." I stood up. The reading is concluded. The months that followed the funeral were a quiet revolution. Serafina, true to her word, tried to fight. She hired an aggressive, expensive law firm that made a lot of noise, filing motions and sending threatening letters. It was all bluster. After 3 months of bleeding money with no results, her lawyers advised her that any formal contest of the will was doomed to fail, citing the overwhelming evidence of Genevieve's competence and clear intent. The fight was over. The promissory notes, however, were another matter entirely. They were legally undeniable. To satisfy the debt to the estate, Serafina and Marcus were forced to sell their sprawling mansion, the one she had so often featured in glossy lifestyle magazines. They downsized to a condominium, a word Serafina had previously only ever uttered with a sneer. Their social standing, built on a foundation of Marcus's inherited wealth and her ruthless ambition, crumbled. News travels fast in those circles, and the story of the surprise inheritance and the massive hidden debt became a delicious piece of gossip. The phone calls stopped. The party invitations dried up. They had become a cautionary tale. I did not, as I had imagined in my darker moments, take pleasure in their ruin. Instead, I felt a strange and quiet emptiness. The victory was hollow. I had won, but I had lost my entire family in the process. My parents tried to bridge the chasm. They called, they sent texts, their messages a clumsy dance of apology and self-interest. "We just want our family back together," my mother wrote. But they never once acknowledged the decades of favoritism, never once admitted the role they played in creating the dynamic that had torn us all apart. Their apologies were for the outcome, not for the cause. I was polite, but distant. The trust was gone, and I knew it could never be rebuilt. The greatest change, however, was within me. I took a leave of absence from my teaching job, needing space to manage the complexities of the estate. I didn't move into Grandma Genevieve's house. It was too large, too quiet, too full of ghosts. Instead, I worked from her study, the room where my transformation had begun. I liquidated some of the riskier assets, consolidated portfolios, and managed the properties with the steady hand she had trained me to have. But the money itself felt like a ball. It was a tool, she had said, a lever. But for what? One evening, sitting alone at her great oak desk, surrounded by the evidence of her wealth, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't Serafina. I wasn't going to use this fortune to build a monument to myself. I was going to use it to honor the two things I loved most: my grandmother's legacy and the calling of it. I established the Genevieve Hale Educational Foundation, an endowment dedicated to funding arts and science programs in under-resourced schools across the state. I used the money to buy new equipment for science labs, to fund scholarships for aspiring teachers, to ensure that children in small forgotten towns had the same opportunities as those in wealthy districts. I became the thing Serafina had always pretended to be: a philanthropist. But my charity wasn't about tax breaks or public recognition. It was about creating real tangible change. It was about using my power for something other than myself. My one constant through all of this was Lee. He was my anchor to my old life, to the person I was before the will reading. He never once treated me differently. To him I was still just Elara, the friend he talked to about difficult students and frustrating school board policies. One afternoon, we were having coffee, and he told me that, inspired by my stand against my family, he had finally had it out with his own parents. He told them he was a teacher, that he was proud of it, and that he would not be applying to law school, now or ever. He said it was the most terrifying and liberating conversation of his life. In that moment, I realized that the truest inheritance my grandmother had left me wasn't the money or the property. It was the strength to live authentically, a gift I had, in some small way, been able to pass on to my friend. Looking back on it all now, it's strange. For so many years, I just wanted to be seen. I wanted my sister, my parents, to look at my life and see value in it, to see